You're about to step back in time to a moment just before the world caught fire. Before trenches stretched across Europe, before millions of young men marched off to die in muddy fields. The year is 1914, but to truly understand why World War I happened, we need to go further back into a tangled forest of ambition, pride, fear, and secret deals where one spark would soon ignite a global inferno. It didn't begin with a villain twirling his mustache or an evil empire on the rise. No, it started with something more ordinary. Something far more human. Mistrust. By the late 1800s, Europe was divided into two giant camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other, the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Great Britain. These weren't just friendly handshake agreements. These were promises of protection. If someone touches you, I'll fight for you. But they were also traps. If one domino fell, the rest had to tumble too. Behind these alliances was a deadly arms race. Every nation wanted to prove it was the strongest. Germany, young and rising fast, was building a navy to rival Britain's legendary fleet. France, still bitter after losing a war to Germany in 1871, dreamed of revenge. Austria-Hungary was terrified of breaking apart. Russia had one foot in Europe, one in Asia, and 1,000 problems at home. And Britain, it wanted to stay the world's top dog. Now imagine all these countries building weapons, training armies, and glaring at each other across borders. Tension hummed in the air like a drawn bowstring, and yet, strangely, people felt secure. They believed these alliances would prevent war. But beneath the surface, Europe was a powder keg, and one tiny spark could set it off. And that spark came from a small, nearly forgotten corner of the map, the Balkans, a place where nationalism boiled hotter than the summer sun, a place where empires clashed with ethnic pride. In 1908, Austria-Hungary did something bold. It annexed Bosnia, a region full of Slavic people: Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, many of whom wanted independence or to join Serbia. This made Serbia furious, and when Serbia's government grew angrier, Russia, its Slavic big brother, stepped in with support. Now Austria-Hungary had a problem. Its empire was full of unhappy nationalities, and if Serbia succeeded in stirring rebellion, it might all fall apart. So Vienna saw Serbia not just as a neighbor, but as a threat to survival. But we're still not at the war. Not yet. Let's talk about Germany, the powerhouse of Europe. The German Empire, led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, was rich, industrialized, and itching to prove itself. Wilhelm wanted a place in the sun, a global empire to match Britain's. He was ambitious, emotional, and unpredictable. His generals believed that war with France and Russia was not a question of if, but when, and they had a plan, a brutal, fast plan to knock France out before Russia could mobilize. It was called the Schlieffen Plan, a name that would soon become infamous. But even now, in 1913, war hadn't begun. There were small crises like the First and Second Balkan Wars, which saw Serbia grow stronger and Austria more nervous. But each time, Europe stepped back from the edge. Peace held, just barely. And then, June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was visiting with his wife, Sophie. They were on a goodwill tour, hoping to calm tensions in Bosnia. But a group of Serbian nationalists, members of the shadowy group known as the Black Hand, had other plans. They believed that if Ferdinand died, it would strike a blow for Slavic freedom. So they set up along his motorcade route, ready to strike. The first assassin failed, his grenade missed. But later that day, as Ferdinand's car took a wrong turn, another assassin, Gavrilo Princip, stepped out of the shadows. He pulled the trigger twice. Ferdinand and Sophie were both killed. And just like that, the fuse was lit. The assassination shocked the world, but what followed next would destroy it. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia, but before it could act, it needed reassurance from Germany. The Kaiser and his advisors gave Vienna what historians call a blank check, a promise of support no matter what. Then came the ultimatum. Austria demanded Serbia let them investigate the killing on Serbian soil. Serbia, under pressure, agreed to most terms but rejected one that would compromise its sovereignty. Austria was done waiting. On July 28, 1914, it declared war on Serbia. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Russia began to mobilize to defend Serbia. Germany, seeing this, declared war on Russia on August 1st. Knowing France would join its ally Russia, Germany declared war on France too on August 3rd. To reach France, Germany invaded Belgium, a neutral country. And that was the final straw. Britain, which had sworn to protect Belgium, declared war on Germany on August 4th. In just 1 week, the world had spiraled into chaos. But was it really all about Franz Ferdinand? Not quite. His death was the spark, but the real reason World War I happened was the system itself. The alliances, the arms race, the nationalism, the fear, the pride. The belief that war was better than weakness. No one thought it would last. Soldiers said they'd be home by Christmas, but they were wrong. The world was not stepping into a quick conflict, it was stepping into hell. And the war to come fought in trenches, in skies, across oceans would change everything. Empires would fall, millions would die, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the Archduke Franz Ferdinand lay lifeless in his car and blood soaked the cobblestones of Sarajevo, the wheels of history had already begun to turn with deadly precision. Austria-Hungary, stunned and enraged, now stood at a crossroads. The assassination wasn't just a personal loss, it was a national insult. But rather than act swiftly, Vienna hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Behind the curtain, however, something far more dangerous was happening. Austria-Hungary, fearing Serbia's growing influence in the Balkans, saw this as the perfect excuse to crush its troublesome neighbor once and for all. But Austria couldn't act alone, it needed the backing of a greater power. That power was Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany was quick to extend what would become known as the blank check, a promise of unconditional support to Austria-Hungary. It was a bold move, reckless even, but Wilhelm believed a swift military strike would restore order. What he failed to consider was the complicated web of alliances that had been spun across Europe for decades. Like a powder keg wrapped in chains, Europe was tightly bound to its promises. And if Austria struck Serbia, the entire continent would ignite. On July 23, 1914, Austria-Hungary delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. The demands were intentionally harsh, designed to be rejected. But Serbia, aware of its vulnerable position, agreed to most of the terms, offering compromise. It wasn't enough. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Just like that, the first domino fell. Russia, bound by its pan-Slavic sympathies and alliance with Serbia, began to mobilize its massive army. The Russians or Nicholas II hoped to deter Austria, not provoke war. But in a world fueled by suspicion, any movement was seen as aggression. Germany, fearing encirclement by Russia and its ally France, issued its own ultimatum demanding Russia stop mobilization. When no reply came, Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France. In a span of days, peace shattered across the continent like glass underfoot. But one more domino had to fall: the British Empire. Germany had a plan, a sweeping military strategy called the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was brutal in its efficiency. Germany would knock out France quickly by invading through neutral Belgium, then pivot east to face Russia. But the plan had one fatal flaw. Belgium was a neutral country, and its neutrality had been guaranteed by Great Britain. When German troops marched into Belgium on August 4, 1914, Britain declared war. Now the conflict wasn't just a Balkan dispute, it was a full-scale world war. But to truly understand how this war exploded so quickly, we have to go deeper beneath the surface of alliances and treaties to the very psychology of the time. The nations of Europe were not just tied together by paper promises. They were driven by something far more dangerous: fear, pride and the myth of war as glorious. Decades of militarism had created a generation that believed war was not only inevitable but desirable. Young men in Paris, Berlin, and London flocked to recruitment centers with enthusiasm. They cheered in the streets, believing they'd be home by Christmas. They carried flowers in their rifles and poems in their pockets. No one knew what was coming. Meanwhile, leaders like Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm, Austria's Emperor Franz Joseph, Russia's Tsar Nicholas II, and even Britain's King George V, though related by blood, were trapped in a game they could no longer control. Diplomacy had failed. The trains had already begun to move, carrying millions of soldiers toward trenches that didn't yet exist, toward horrors no one could imagine. The media in each country played its role, fanning the flames of nationalism and demonizing the enemy. Political leaders spoke of honor and justice. But behind closed doors, they all feared looking weak. No one wanted to be the one who backed down. And so, driven by the toxic brew of alliances, militarism, and pride, Europe stepped into the abyss. As German troops stormed into Belgium and France, and Russian soldiers clashed with Austrians along the Eastern Front, the war took on a momentum of its own. It spread like wildfire first across Europe, then beyond. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers. Japan declared war on Germany. And soon, battles were being fought in Africa, the Pacific, and the Middle East. This was no longer a European conflict. It had become the First World War, and yet, beneath the marching boots and booming cannons. The true reason for the war's explosion was not a single assassination or a clever plan. It was the result of decades of unchecked ambition, imperial jealousy, and the belief that war could solve what words could not. The world's leaders had built a system too fragile to endure stress and then poured gasoline on it. When the match was struck in Sarajevo, the fire didn't spread because of fate, it spread because the world had made it inevitable. And as soldiers dug into the muddy fields of France, as gas filled the air over Ypres, as entire towns vanished under artillery fire, the world realized too late what it had done. But by then, there was no turning back. The machine of war had started, and it would not stop until millions were dead. In the midst of it all, a question lingered. Could it have been prevented? Could the leaders have stepped back, swallowed their pride, and saved a generation? Historians still debate that. But one thing is clear: this war was not just a chain reaction of treaties and bullets. It was a tragedy years in the making, born from arrogance, fear, and the deadly illusion that modern war would be quick and clean. Instead, it became a 4-year nightmare that reshaped the world. You're back on that cobbled European road. The air is electric, and the storm clouds have finally burst, but this isn't rain, this is war. The guns have fired, the horses have charged. The alliances have snapped into place like a deadly machine coming to life, and it all began with one bullet. It's June 28, 1914. The sun rises over Sarajevo, and a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip waits on a street corner. In his coat is a gun. His hand is trembling. He doesn't fully grasp it yet, but he's about to set the entire world on fire. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, arrives with his wife Sophie, it should have been a quiet diplomatic visit, but tensions have been simmering in the Balkans for years. Serbian nationalists see Austria-Hungary as an occupier. Young men like Princip, part of the secretive group Black Hand, have made a dangerous vow: remove the foreign rulers. Earlier that morning, another assassin throws a bomb at the Archduke's car. It bounces off the vehicle and explodes behind them, injuring members of the entourage. Franz Ferdinand, shaken but alive, insists on continuing the visit. Hours later, as his car takes a wrong turn, it slows to reverse, right in front of the very cafe where Princip just happens to be standing. In a moment of chaotic fate, Gavrilo pulls the trigger, Franz and Sophie are killed instantly. And the world holds its breath, but this wasn't just a murder. This wasn't just a royal funeral. This was a loaded pistol pointed at the heart of Europe. Austria-Hungary is furious, but it doesn't declare war immediately. No, it prepares something more dangerous, a diplomatic ultimatum to Serbia filled with impossible demands. Behind the scenes, Austria has a green light from Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm promises full support. Blank check, they call it. Meanwhile, Serbia turns to its protector, Russia. And just like that, the dominoes start to fall. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia begins to mobilize. Germany sees this as a threat and declares war on Russia on August 1st. France, Russia's ally, is drawn in. Germany declares war on France next. Britain watches nervously. But when Germany violates Belgium's neutrality to reach France, Britain, protector of Belgium, enters the war. By August 4th, all the major powers are in. What was meant to be a regional conflict becomes a world war. But here's the twist: most people thought it would be quick. Home by Christmas, they said. But this war had a new face, one of barbed wire, poison gas, trenches, and machine guns. This was not like the elegant battles of the 19th century. This was industrial death. Across the Western Front, from the fields of Belgium to the rivers of France, soldiers dug into the ground. Trenches stretched for hundreds of miles, mud, rats, frostbite, and endless artillery fire became daily life. Men went over the top and never came back. The world saw weapons it had never imagined. Chlorine gas, flamethrowers, tanks, airplanes, and U-boats turned the war into a nightmare. No one had prepared for this kind of carnage. Generals still thought in old ways, send wave after wave, even as new weapons mowed men down like grass. On the Eastern Front, Russia struggled against Germany and Austria. Internal unrest brewed, and soon revolution would shake the empire. In the Middle East, Arab rebels, guided by the British, fought against Ottoman rule. In Africa and Asia, colonial soldiers fought a war not entirely theirs. Meanwhile, far from the trenches, factories in Europe and America buzzed with war production. Civilians rationed food, women entered the workforce en masse. Propaganda flooded the newspapers, every citizen became part of the war machine. And then, in 1917, the balance shifted. America, once neutral, was dragged into the war. Why? Several reasons. First, German U-boats had been sinking neutral ships, including the British passenger liner Lusitania, where American lives were lost. Second, the infamous Zimmermann telegram, a secret German message offering Mexico U.S. territory if they attacked America, was intercepted. That was the final straw. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Fresh American troops, supplies, and energy tipped the scales. Meanwhile, back in Russia, revolution exploded. The Tsar was overthrown. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power and pulled Russia out of the war in early 1918. Germany, relieved on the Eastern Front, launched a final offensive in the West. But it was too late. The Allies pushed back. German morale collapsed. At home, protests erupted, the Kaiser abdicated. And on November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. The war was over, but nothing would ever be the same. So let's ask that question one last time. Why did World War I really happen? It wasn't just about Franz Ferdinand. It wasn't just about alliances. It was a storm born from nationalism, imperialism, fear, and pride. A Europe armed to the teeth, led by men who thought war was noble, who believed a short conflict would settle old scores. Instead, it shattered empires. Austria-Hungary, gone. Ottoman Empire, broken. German Empire. Collapsed. Russian Empire. Revolutionized. Millions were dead. Millions more wounded. In body, in mind, in spirit. Entire generations lost in the mud and the peace. That peace would plant the seeds of something even darker, but that is another story.